Hello and good afternoon. Most welcome to H753. We are recording at the house here in Eggvena, and I have to mention I was just about to start this lecture when we got interrupted in the very moment of action. And that reminds me the Eurovision Song Contest many years ago, when the famous group, the duo Azúcar Moreno, was trying to perform their song, and they were actually stopped in the act no less than 3 times. For some mad reason they still managed to perform in the end, but you can imagine the circumstances, being very psyched to perform, and then it's some technicality. I thought it was in this reason something to do with the recording, but oddly enough they managed anyway. I am not that professional as Azúcar Moreno, although I really like their music. That doesn't seem to have affected me, but I would still give it a try here because I have a really big surprise. I can say myself, I completely lost my composure when I discovered the very latest of discoveries when it comes to our research within the brain. And that came to my knowledge through the author and Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she starts one of the introductions about mentioning a youngling a couple of years ago. His name was Jonko Tsarnaev, and it was a court in Boston that he admitted being guilty of planting a pressure cooker filled with acetone and nails in the Boston Marathon, and thereby exploding the whole thing, wounding 187 people and killing 3 people. In this very important instance in the court, when he pleaded guilty and he apologized for the harm that he had caused, instead of looking regretful and full of shame, he showed a complete stony face to the court, and especially the juror. In Massachusetts, which is the name of the state, it is actually also the responsibility of the juror to decide about capital punishment. And of course, from the side of Tsarnaev, he wanted to avoid capital punishment. But that stony-faced send him to the gallows. It is very hard to tell whether he was regretful or not, but there are some pertinent factors to consider, and I am in not any respect, neither did Lisa Feldman, defending Jonko Tsarnaev, but there are some circumstances that need to be taken in consideration. Actually, these considerations are at least a millennia and a half old. What happened? Some things that we thought to be true, never questioned, and we haven't even discovered that those assumptions existed, had turned to be untrue. And we have to rewrite most of history in some aspects because of this. So what could this be? Before I go into the details, I need here to make a completely different point. Here we have, together with quantum mechanics, a deep questionings of assumptions we didn't even know we made. No philosopher, no thinking person had thought about this, not at one singular instance. And that is very similar to quantum mechanics. And wouldn't you consider this to be a problem, those assumptions, or what you could call them? Heidegger has a good name for it, amnesia. But he does not, however, specify what that amnesia is about. Why? Well, because we cannot know. We only know that the project of understanding was put on hold until now. And now we have to restart to make an ontology. That's quite a task, but I think this is somewhere in between exhilarating and completely scary. That I am governed by assumptions I never know about, never been expressed, and I always assume them. That is in itself incredibly interesting. They've always been there, they've been part of my reality. And that these things were actually assumptions. It's just mind-blowing. I read this Lisa Feldman Barrett on Christmas Day, and a couple of hours later I had to leave it on the side, but I wrote this little lecture, a little introductory lecture to this interesting idea, because it was just too fantastically interesting. That's that. Now let's cut to the chase and get into the meaty, juicy details of what is discovered. Emotions. Have you heard about those? Well, what could they be? Well, we have happiness, anger, joy, surprise, what more? Sadness, and more feelings. Already Parmenides wrote about feelings, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and through the whole history of mankind. What is feelings? Or what are feelings? Well, they seem to be a sort of very ingrained reactions. Somebody says something to me or something happening outside, I'm reacting emotionally directly. When I see this juicy bun here, Kalle presented me with, this is a sort of luxury variety of the Swedish lussekatt. They made it into Danish at the same time, making it even more luxurious, more enticing. What happens? Well, by looking at it, I'm getting anticipations. I want it. I get like hungry a little bit. And yes, this is happening now. The juices in my mouth are flooding. This is what Pavlov said, the emotional response, or the ingrained response to the lovely thing here in front of me. And it's hardwired into my system. So every time I see this thing, I'm bound to get hungry or ticklish, or actually even to think of a bakery. Maybe I'm going to a bakery that will start maybe half an hour earlier, and I can't stop that because it's ingrained. And let's move from the lussekatt to France. In France, until quite recently, they had something called crime passionnel, and that was if you killed somebody and it was a love affair and unfaithfulness was going on, you got a lesser sentence. Why? Because you did it in affect. You were ruled by your emotions. You went home early, you quit your job early, and you went home at 2 o'clock, and you found your missus in bed with somebody else. And you killed that person usually with a knife or something. Not a pistol, because that would have been premeditated. But something you found in the apartment. You are doing things by effect. Can you hear how ingrained this is in our thinking? these hardwired emotions that we already have as very young, like babies. We react to our mothers, we smile when we see her with joy, we get frightened by loud sounds, we get hungry when we see our mother because we want some food, and you get tired. That's maybe not an emotion, but emotion-like. We are ruled by that, and it's so easy to see on a baby. It directly reacts. It doesn't even have to be completely conscious. Even a smiling baby, even a baby sleeping can be smiling slightly. Let me make this absolutely clear. People often think of hardwired things. That's why we were looking at this Jonko Tsarnaev and his reaction. Because when he said, "I am guilty, I deeply regret the hurt I caused to the people, innocent bystanders and runners in the Boston Marathon," when he didn't show any regret in his face, he didn't even feel any. That was the message. This is how we perceive it. Because emotions are hardwired, you can't fake them. Well, you can almost fake them, but it's a real reaction. And especially when you don't even try to fake them. That's obvious. Tsarnaev was sentenced to death. He's currently on death row. He's been transported, I heard, to Arizona to take his final punishment. So you see, those things does have an effect. Used to have a big effect in the French legal system. It has an effect everywhere. And wherever you look in literature, you will find reference to this ingrained. When we talk about emotions, you say, "I couldn't help, I got so angry. I got so happy, I couldn't hide my emotions. I'm so in love. I hate that person. I can't help it. I just dislike this cookie," which is untrue. It looks very interesting. The only thing that's missing here is a microwave to heat it up a bit. So I'm already thinking here. But I can't help it. I'm ruled by my emotions. They are hardwired. Listen now carefully. We have discovered, we've been looking through the brain, upside, inside, outside. We've been seeing the reactions. And there is no hard wiring of emotions at all. None. There's not even hard wiring of emotions in babies. So assumptions need to be completely crossed out because they don't hold anymore. And this seemed to be a discovery within brain science. We don't have inborn traits. This is rather a thing. Who would have thought? We can be no other thing than shocked. And this is the point Jonko Tsarnaev brought up. Because Jonko Tsarnaev was not an American. He was of Chechen origin. And in Chechnya, when you really regret something, what you should show is, or what you should show and feel is defeat. Not regret, defeat. And that stony face is defeat and nothing else. I will just start to look at it, at what the scientists think that what we call emotions could be made up of if they're not hardwired. What could they be? The odd thing is they are actually created by the mind. They are creations. And they are hypotheses about the world. We know now that we create our own emotions. They will take time to be created, and they are often created in different contexts. But emotional things are not responses. They are just the opposite. They are hypotheses of what could happen. And they are a result of the thinking mind, not the body. Emotions come not from the body. It comes from the thinking part of the brain. It is exactly the opposite of what Plato said. And it's exactly the opposite what everyone said. No one said anything to this extent, ever. This goes to show that we are so ruled by these assumptions that the very foundation of what we stand, a foundation that we thought was firm enough to stand on and do our project, whatever project that was. If it was philosophy, if it was logic, if it was the Enlightenment, all those projects are standing on mud. They are not standing on anything established. Because when I read emotions, because emotions are incredibly important to establish as being ingrained, because thanks to that we can discern something we call rationality. And by this mixture, when emotions disappears, in a way also rationality disappears, because they are codependent. And I think it doesn't take much thinking to understand you cannot only have rationality. It doesn't make sense. Not the Western way of rationality, because rationality is almost defined about being not emotional. Now all of a sudden we realized it's the thinking that produces emotions. And they can be incredibly different from culture to culture. And they do not show up any 5 or 6 or 7 basic emotions. I can just associate here that we had in Sweden after the war a very famous book that had great influence. This is just an example, it's not to prove a point here. And I also mention it because we all know about this, people listening, at least the Swedes. It's a Swedish affair, I'm afraid, but even you foreign listener could take some interest in this. Sweden is one of the most secularized countries in the world, there's no doubt about that. There is about 2% who regularly attend services. 2%. It's very little. And that change came about really fast in Sweden. Not like other countries where it started already in the 18th century. Here, nothing really happened before the turn of the last century. But one of the things that are very important was the book Faith and Knowing. And there was a distinction between rationality and emotions. Emotions were the lesser kind, whereas rationality, that was the higher. This book was well thought out and it became very popular and it had an immense effect on what happened later. It influenced the educational system, complete change of the educational system in direction of secularity, and we started that already 1948. We saw the effects already in the late 60s. That's when it's really starting to happen effectively. The ones that grew up with this new schooling system. The effect took hold and they escalated and they escalated. And it's not an exaggeration that all the clergy today accepts the division made by the author of the book, because that division was already present. It has been present for 2,500 years. Emotions are always lower because they're not rational. Well, hey, something happened here. Rationality produces emotions, and they are survival hypotheses. They are actually the highest thinking that we put in. Maybe not always we put in that much planning into our emotions, but they are extremely important for rationality to sort of embody what they want, what the rationality wants to do. So all of a sudden a whole book falls, and all of a sudden a lot of the hard material for the secularization, well, at least what was accepted, that we changed the educational system completely as the first non-communist country in the world. That was Sweden that. And of course in Sweden, if you want to change something from the authority and having only one singular school in the whole of Sweden. Even Denmark, which is that conservative, had 28. And normally in countries is that you have hundreds of them. In Sweden we had only one. Of course that had a huge influence. Today everybody think religion is ridiculous, and even our archbishop think faith is more emotion. Well, emotion in this hardwired way. I can't help but believe there is a God. But it's in my corporal system. It's my amygdala that tells me that there's God. Where's my emotions? It's a little bit like somebody being over emotional, like a young child getting too emotional. Nothing to be really trusted. And they admit it themselves. So you see these things really have an advanced effect. I had loads of discussions about this book, and of course I thought it was ridiculous in every way, but now it doesn't only is ridiculous, it's completely untrue from the start. That distinction is false, and actually it is the emotions that are the most planned, more planned than the made up rationality. If you want to give them different quality, one rationality is made up at the spot, as the author did, or one rationality is long-term, like emotions are, like faith, or believing in something, or loyalty, thought out, not something you feel, something you do, because you planned it. Does it sound different? Yes. Would any other philosophers agree with me? No. Would any modern talker or thinker or influencer agree with me? No. I have only to point to science. That's it. Only a little part of science, and that's brain science, neurology, which is very hard to understand. Lisa Feldman-Bartek made a good effort to make it understandable for us usual laymen. But I remember saying, I shouldn't like tap myself on the shoulder as we say in Swedish, but didn't I say that I thought soon enough something will happen within brain science? And I thought we all were waiting for quantum mechanics to enter into brain science. I remember saying that somewhere 3-4 years ago, and I think it's just a matter of time. Well, I was part right. This is not quantum mechanics. We didn't need that. This is advanced equations. This is advanced mapping of the activities of the brain. And we know now there is no hardwiring of emotions. That's it. And how long time it will be until the world accepts it, I don't know. But I am definitely ever so happy to have that knowledge. And I think you can understand my gusto here. This is hugely interesting. It's like, well, it's not like finding out the quantum mechanics again, but it's like a small quantum mechanics, small scale quantum mechanics. And what made me so anticipative was, above all, this is an incredibly important distinction. That is not a chance that Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Parmenides all mention emotion and wrote a lot about them. Because if you don't establish emotions as hardwired, it'd be very hard to establish rationality. And the distinction rationality emotions goes like a braided core through whole of thinking history, and it rules the thinking. It puts limits to it. And although this might sound scary, it will not take away anything of our possibility. But it will, however, open up a lot of new thinking, a lot of new possibilities, and that goes way beyond brain research. Actually, we could be happy enough. I'm going to take this up again. Trust me, I'm not going to leave this, but in a way it's enough just to know that emotions are not hardwired. That takes away so much already established things. And it actually points to, nobody thought about that. Nobody in the, for instance, 19th century sat down on the chair, looked out at the night sky, had a glass of cognac and said, are really emotions hardwired? Do we really have a choice when we feel them? No, nobody thought about that. And I think that is almost as important. I'll write that as number 2. And that one we need to remember and put into other stuff. But already here, a lot of things starts cracking, because if you start to understand emotions are made, they are hypotheses by rationality. This is the most rational thing we have, not the least. And they are not different in kind, rationality and emotions. You could call rationality short-term rationality and emotions long-term rationality. I don't even know what sort of Pandora's box. Well, I wouldn't call it Pandora's box, because this is science, and science never gets you into the wrong alley. As long as it's opening up thinking you didn't even know was possible to open up. This is so interesting, so it's just amazing. And I'd say this could actually be the last cogwheel in this process of locking up knowledge that we see the effects of. Like Ian McGilchrist mentioned, we stand in for an intellectual disaster. Maybe that disaster doesn't have, as some people think, economical reasons or development in society. I think, and I had my suspicion a long time, it's not so much to do what's happening right now. I think that's just the triggering points. What is established 2,500 years ago, that is what's playing out. That is what's giving it the effects. And that is the really important point. So that could be much more interesting than, I wouldn't say quantum mechanics, but up in that region. Very interesting so far. Her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett, whatever I said before. It's a hard name to, Bartet actually, to be quite concise. Bartet is her name. And I will get back to her quite soon. I will dwell into her now. I managed to get her book. And I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant evening.
Thank you.